Hey guys, it's been a long time, man. I hope all y'all are doing good. All right. Hey, please excuse the hair and the no beard. I know I look a little different than the last time you saw me. So I know this is really different than what we're used to doing. So I'll do my best to make things short, sweet, and easy. Remember, I hope all of y'all get to see this video. If you have any trouble contacting me through Remind because it seems to be crashing, you can comment on Google Class, or you can email me at my school email, which is all over Google Class too. Also, make sure you spread the information through your classmates, through your friends, and anybody that you know that has my class, because I know it's really hard for a lot of people right now. I know things are kind of confusing. The one thing I do ask is make sure that you stay on the ball and you're doing all your work, not only for me but for your other teachers, because they're working just. I mean, I'm in a hospital room right now and I'm doing this for you. So you make sure you do what you have to do too. All right. So like I said, I'm gonna make this short and sweet. The only thing I'm gonna talk about in this video is Ronald Reagan. We are talking about 1981 to about 1989. So we're only covering slide 28 to 36 on the PowerPoint. Okay. All the notes, all the PowerPoint, and the chapter are all based on Ronald Reagan right now. That's all you have to worry about. So you'll be able to answer most of the questions off the stuff that I give you. Actually, you'll be able to answer all the questions off the stuff that I give you. All right. So when Ronald Reagan came back into office in 1981, America saw a resurgence of something called conservatism. All right. Don't worry about the beeps or anything like that. It's nothing. Okay. If you see me running away, then it's something. Okay. If you don't remember what conservatism is, it was like leaving the country up to the people. It was the same type of beliefs that they had in the 1920s. Now, if you remember back in the 1920s, a lot of the presidents didn't want to get involved with everyday citizens, which was led to the Great Depression. Okay. Because Democratic presidents hadn't been working out, when Ronald Reagan came back in as a Republican, he reintroduced conservatism. Okay, so he wanted to reduce taxes and federal regulations on businesses. He wanted to increase private competition, and he wanted to increase the strength of the military. Okay, now Reagan's big thing is that he wanted to expand the size of the government in one direction while reducing it in another. All right. So before Ronald Reagan actually became president, he was actually a Hollywood movie star. Okay, and he was originally a Democrat until he realized the federal government was too powerful and intrusive. He didn't like the fact that the government was getting too involved in our lives with things like the New Deal, with Social Security, with the ERA, with the EPA, and all these little vocabulary words. All right. Now, the rising inflation and the Iranian hostage crisis that happened when President Carter was in office had a lot of people in America not liking Democratic candidates. So that was one of the main reasons that Ronald Reagan was able to win. He was a Republican, he was very well liked, and he wanted to bring back the conservatism idea to America. One of the first things Ronald Reagan did was appoint George H.W. Bush to be his vice president. Now, I'm not talking about the Bush that you guys know, I'm talking about the older Bush, senior Bush, all right? Before he became president of the United States, he actually served as Ronald Reagan's vice president for 8 years. So all throughout the 80s, the only two guys that were in the White House were Ronald Reagan and George Bush. All right. Now, Ronald Reagan's domestic policy. So these are the things that he was doing at home. Okay. So one of the things you have to know about Ronald Reagan, he has something called supply side economics. Okay. They had a nickname for it. It was called Reaganomics. Okay, supply side economics meant to lower the taxes and decrease business regulations. Basically, what he wanted to do was get out of people's way so that way businesses could expand and grow. However, if you look back onto the Gilded Age, if you look back into the 1920s, if you look back into any of those things, usually what happens when the government steps out, businesses tend to take advantage of the common man. Okay, Ronald Reagan was basically going back to that ideology. Okay, the reason is because our country was in a downward spiral. We had stagflation, the unemployment rate was going up, and a lot of bad things were happening. Now, his big reason behind Reaganomics was he believed that a larger supply of goods would drive down the prices and stop inflation, but it would also lead to a high unemployment as businesses needed increased workers. Okay, I'm sorry, it would also lead to a higher employment as businesses would need workers. So basically what he was saying is let these businesses create as many supplies and as many goods as they want, right? Because the more supplies and goods that we have, the lower the price will be, which will cause more people to buy. When more people buy, businesses are doing well, right? Which will allow them to hire more employees. Now, you see how that doesn't necessarily make sense, right? How is a business going to be doing well? It doesn't matter how many supplies I'm selling, but what I'm selling them for. If I sell 100 supplies for $1 each, but if I sell one supply for $100, it's the same concept. I'm still making the same amount of money. So essentially, Reaganomics didn't make sense. It didn't really work. Under Reaganomics, the U.S. debt rose, okay? No other president in the history of America has raised the debt higher than Ronald Reagan, all right? Unemployment rate also rose as Americans bought more things from overseas. Okay, we had increased competition from foreign markets. This is where you start to see the fluctuation of things coming from China, things coming from India. Remember, you've heard me say it in class before. Look at the tag on your clothes. Look at where your furniture in your house was made from. Most of it was not made here in America. So if we're not making those things here in America, that means there's no jobs here in America. All right. So the debt rose because of all the military spending that he was doing, and unemployment rose because of all the foreign markets that were giving us competition. Okay. Now, under Ronald Reagan, there's one act that you have to really know about. It's called the Mazzoli-Simpson Act. And if you guys, right there, ooh, can't see it, but that's where I'm at right there, okay? The Mazzoli-Simpson Act, it changed the United States immigration policy to deal with illegal aliens by legalizing them, all right? What Ronald Reagan did was, if you were an illegal alien that had been in the United States since at least 1981, you were automatically legalized. Okay, what essentially he thought was, if we can't kick them all out, then we'll make them citizens. That was the Mazzoli-Simpson Act. Make sure you understand what that is. Okay, under Ronald Reagan, America saw its first ever female Supreme Court justice. Okay, remember that was a big deal. Remember when we talked about Thurgood Marshall, and it was such a big deal because he was the first black Supreme Court justice? Well, Sandra Day O'Connor was the first female Supreme Court justice. Okay. And that was a big deal for Ronald Reagan. One, it was a huge step for women's rights. And two, it showed his presidency was willing to be less sexist than other presidencies before him. All right. Now, one of Ronald Reagan's big thing was something called peace through strength. The easiest way I can explain peace through strength is, imagine seeing a guy walking down the street who happens to be 6'6" and 250 pounds of pure muscle. And he says, hey, I want to fight you. You going to fight him? Probably not. Okay? That's what peace through strength was. He wanted to increase the strength of the military so much and have us be so imposing and so big that nobody on earth would ever dare to mess with us. That's good and bad. It's good because, well, it'll keep our enemies from trying to attack, but it's also bad because that means a lot of the money that we spend in this country is going to go to increasing our military strength, when it can go to other places like social forums, schooling, fixing cities and towns, and things like that. All right. One of the first things Ronald Reagan did was send Marines to Grenada. Okay, remember, we're still in the Cold War, and Grenada had been taken over by communists. Okay, remember the policy of containment. Okay, we want to stop communism from spreading. So that's one of the facets of the Cold War. He sent Marines to Grenada to stop communism from spreading, and this Peace Through Strength initiative was to basically a big threat to communist nations all over the world, saying, look at us, we're America, we're too big, we're too strong, don't mess with us. Okay. He enacted some things called his like Star Wars, or his Strategic Defense Initiative, which was a space-based program to shoot down missiles. It didn't work, okay? But it was just a way to deter the Soviets from actually shooting missiles at us. Again, not necessarily using our strength, but just showing our enemies that we're too strong to be messed with. That's peace through strength, okay? And under Reagan, we started the war on terrorism. Guys, we've been in a war on terrorism since about 1982, 1983, and it's been going on till this day. I mean, you guys have heard of terrorism since basically we were born. Saddam Hussein, Osama bin Laden, Al Qaeda, all these things. Well, it started under Reagan with a man named Muammar Gaddafi. All right, Muammar Gaddafi was a terrorist in Libya. And Ronald Reagan's initiative was to take him out. We also sent troops to Lebanon in a peacekeeping operation. However, we had 241 Marines that were killed by a suicide bomber. So there were terroristic threats all over the world. Ronald Reagan, using his peace through strength, wanted to use America as the world police, and he wanted to go to different parts of the world to make sure that we were combating terrorism whenever we could. Okay? And remember, make sure you know what terrorism is. It's a bombing, assassination, kidnaps, or act of terror to make sure that a political group is being hurt. All right? That's essentially what terrorism is for. They don't do it for fun. They do it because they're trying to prove a point to the rest of the world. Now, being in the war on terrorism, the Iran-Contra affair was a very big deal in America. All right? The Iran-Contra affair was a secret operation run by Reagan and some White House officials. Reagan's big ideology was that he would refuse to negotiate with terrorists. All right, there would be no negotiation whatsoever. America would use its muscle to take them out. All right. However, Reagan's administration was caught selling weapons to Iran to release American hostages in Lebanon. Okay. Now, profits from those sales were given to Nicaraguan Contras who were fighting communism in Nicaragua. I know it sounds kind of weird, but this is what I want. This is basically what he was doing. Ronald Reagan said that he would not negotiate with any form of terrorist in the world. However, he got caught selling weapons to terrorists, and the money that he got from those weapons, he didn't invest it back into the American economy. He didn't invest it back into the American people. What he did was actually go to Nicaragua, to a rebel force, give them the money so they could fight the communists there. Remember, America never really wanted to directly confront Russia in the Cold War. We would basically send our little allies to fight them. This is one way that we funded our allies. All right, we actually sold weapons to terrorists. This was really bad for the image of Reagan because, again, it was just another way for the American people not to trust his government. Think about that. Okay, imagine the American president saying, I will not negotiate with any terrorists around the world. And then the very next week you find out that he's actually selling terrorist weapons. All right, it was a really big blow to the Reagan administration, and it was a big blow to that credibility gap. Remember the distrust from the American public to the American government. All right, that's growing and growing and growing. All right. The one good thing that did happen, or there were good things that happened under Reagan, but the one big thing that happened under Reagan is democracy finally triumphed. Guys, we've been in the Cold War since 1945, and guess what? We win, okay? We won the space race. We won the arms race. We won, okay? The evil empire, or the USSR, okay, was led by Mikhail Gorbachev, all right? And he introduced free enterprise reforms and all these things. But basically what was happening was this. Russia's economy was failing. They weren't able to keep up with us throughout the Cold War. Remember, being at war is expensive, especially when you're paying other countries to do your dirty business, which essentially is what we were doing too. Okay? Some say that President Reagan deserved all the credit for the fall of communism because of his strong-handed defense. Others believe Reagan benefited from Russia's weak economy. In the end, it doesn't really matter how it ended. The fact is that it ended and we won. All right. Now, little date to remember. Cold War started in 45. It technically ended in 1989. However, the Berlin Wall didn't go down to 1991. All right. Guys, I really hope you stay focused. I really hope you do your work. I really hope you see these videos, and just contact me if you need any help. All right. I know these are strange times we're living in, but everybody will be okay, and I really hope I'll see you soon. All right.